you for having us here and for inviting me to speak about modular housing. I apologise for the difficult surname. It looks deceptively simple. But yeah, Mike's absolutely right. Modular housing is something of a disruptor at the moment in the market, and I'm going to be introducing the sector to you. I'm sure a lot of you will have at least some knowledge of it, but I'm going to run through what the sector is. I should point out from the outset that I'm a policy advisor. I'm not a technical expert. I will do what I can to answer your questions when they come along, but I'm looking here at giving you an overview of the industry and perhaps a high level understanding of some of the challenges that we face in terms of fire safety and some of the ways that our organisations are trying to meet those challenges. So first of all, I represent Make Modular, and you might not have heard of it. It's essentially, we're a subsidiary of Make UK. Make Modular is acting to be the voice of the modular housing industry. We were only launched in December 2021. And our aim is to speak with a single voice for the modular housing industry, to gather information about that industry and to publish it. We're aware that it is a relatively emergent sector. And as a result, there is still not a lot of information about the sector as a whole, certainly not reliable information. So part of my job in particular is to try and produce that. But we work with government and other stakeholders to try and influence policy decisions and inform policy decisions about modular housing. We do use Make UK's well-established communications, marketing, government affairs and policy team who are essentially at our disposal to support us. But I and my boss, who sadly cannot be here today to give this talk, are the core members of staff supporting Make Modular as we grow. So what are our activities? Well, as I say, supported by our parent organisation, Make UK, we're working to increase engagement with key decision makers, including cabinet ministers and opposition frontbenchers. We have spoken and have regular liaisons with DLUC, Homes England, and HMT, BAYS, etc., some of which is facilitated through our relationship with Make UK, but a lot of it is relationships, particularly with DLUC and Homes England, that we've had to establish ourselves since we emerged on the scene. We essentially work with civil service policymakers and regulators to act as a liaison between modular producers and the government. But as you can see, there are a number of other things that we do, including communications work and media work, and all the representative work that, like Mike said, Make UK are doing for the wider manufacturing sector. So you can see here some of our members. We have Lang O'Rourke, Stelling Properties, Legal & General, Ilk Homes, Top Hat, and Vision Modular Systems, and these are examples of some of our membership engagements. So here we have the CEO of Make UK and two of our members meeting with the current, although I'm sure soon to be outgoing, Secretary of State at DLUC. We have Rishi Sunak at Legal & General's Modular Homes Factory, making part of a modular home. We have us there liaising with the former Housing Minister, and then we have Dame Judith Hackett there giving the keynote address at our opening launch back in December last year. So, yes, as promised, here is a bit of a definitional work around what modular is. I'm aware it's very important at this stage to define terms. The MMC, the Modern Methods of Construction category system, was established by the government a few years ago now to sort of make sense of what is a highly fragmented market and to try and understand what different producers are doing. The first two categories, 6 and 7, are basically improvements to on-site processes, but all of the rest involve pre-manufactured components. So we can see here, for instance, non-structural assembly. So the logo is quite a good example of that. You can make bathroom units and pods that can be installed into a house. You can have additive manufacturing. Essentially, that is manufacturing through 3D printing systems. You then move on to more advanced, like off-site components. And then the panelized structural systems that sometimes is also referred to as 2D modular. And this is where components of a house, like a wall, a roof, etc., can be constructed off-site, shipped onto a building site, and then installed onto the foundations of a house. But what we represent is one step above that. And our members all produce all of these panelized systems, the whole house, but they construct the entire thing off-site and they ship the house on the back of a truck, or the modules that are then assembled into the full house or flat or apartment block off-site at the building location. So that gives you a sense of what we are. So when I talk about modular, I'm talking about that category 1 work there, the most advanced, the most sort of all-encompassing aspect of modular, if you like. But it is important to recognize that that modern methods of construction take many forms. So yeah, to summarize that into some key points, modular homes are factory built. They are built inside, under the cover of a factory, on an assembly line in the same sort of way and to the same principles that you would construct a car or any other manufactured item. The whole homes, or modules that are assembled into the full home, that is 3D components, are assembled off-site. This is why they're called volumetric, because they are a 3D structure with a volume. They are transported to the site by road. They're then craned into place. It takes about 30 minutes to an hour to put the modules onto their foundations or on top of each other. And then essentially, they're installed to sub-utilities, substructure and utilities. So the groundworks, for instance, will have to be put in place, and then the utilities are installed. And that can take anywhere between a few days and a couple of weeks. And then they're commissioned and tested before work is done to hand over. So these are just some examples of what we do. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept, but I do always like to include some images on these things. I think the one I find particularly fascinating is actually the idea that the whole roof, for instance, can be installed as can be built as a flat component and then installed and then lifted on a crane. So actually, you don't even need somebody working at a 45-degree angle on a ladder. You can actually, on scaffolding, you can build a roof literally flat on the ground. It's quite impressive. So I'm going to run through a few of the benefits of modular. It's not a marketing exercise. I think it gives context to what I'm going to discuss later and to why modular is taking off. So essentially, modular homes can be built a lot faster. They can actually, our members can all produce homes on the assembly line within a couple of weeks. That is, construct the entire module, or in some cases, the entire house, in a couple of weeks. And that's obviously a significant reduction on the several months it takes to build a home on site. And this, as I say, is because of the idea you're constructing something on an assembly line where pieces of the housing are produced on a sort of a compartmentalized, very regularized sort of system in which people are working on the same areas, gaining efficiencies, and you're moving along all indoors as well. You can work at night. You can be building a house throughout the night, at any shift along the day. You're not constricted by the weather. Obviously, the groundworks are on site, but you can be building the house while the groundworks are being finished on site. And overall, when added together, these components tend to cut the overall building time by 50%. And this holds across low-rise and high-rise developments. So this isn't just building houses in the conventional sense. One of our members, who I'll be using as a case study later, constructs entirely high-rise buildings, and they are those high-risk buildings that we heard from D-Luck earlier. They are very tall, and in fact, I'm responsible for constructing the largest modular building in Europe. And to just give a quick sense of where we are, there'll be a graph later, but output has now doubled in the last 5 years, despite the pandemic. So we're now looking at 2,500 homes being built using this category 1 modular. It's important to remember there will be other MMC homes being built across the country, probably several thousand, but we obviously don't represent those. And our members now have a substantial pipeline in place. They're expecting to be producing over 10,000 homes by 2025. That's not a sort of pie in the sky thing. That's very much business expectations, not targets. So I don't know what happened to that second point, but I think modular essentially promotes building, I think it's meant to say building better, because it can essentially, it has the continuous improvement process that exists in any manufacturing setting, and also has various quality assurance processes built in and quality tracking built in. And again, it's the idea that you can have everything done in a much more regimented way. So you can have all sorts of complicated components of a build that can be constructed far more easily than they can be on-site, because they're not being built in the way that you build on-site. A whole building doesn't have to be built literally from the ground up. Components can be assembled and then merged together in ways that you can't do using traditional methods. And we see the growth of the industry as additional to traditional building. We don't want to necessarily replace traditional building. We think we have benefits that we hope to incentivize and improve across the industry, but we want to see modular help us to improve housing supply. And because of the way we're built, because of the way homes are built with modular, they tend to be greener as well. So a lot of our members are routinely delivering EPC A homes. Now the average for traditional building is actually EPC B. In fact, there's actually more EPC C and D homes being built in the market today than there are EPC A homes. So whereas with modular, most of them are delivering regularly EPC A homes. And some have gone further. You may have seen one of our members, Ilk Homes, launch the very first zero bill homes in the country this year. They're actually being built now. In fact, I think they've finished. They're being marketed, they're being sold. It's a provable product. And they do exist. And it's essentially done through very sort of efficient insulation and the use of various renewables, air source heat pumps, etc. And again, it's only possible really to do this currently as efficiently as they have done because it's modular, because it's constructed in the way it is off-site, and because of 5 years of very intensive research and development. And also because of the different materials that are used, whole life embodied carbon emissions, so that is the carbon footprint of a home, is reduced by about half. And that is actually in the case of the high-rise buildings that some of our members produce, which use steel and concrete, that are still high carbon materials. So in some cases, the timber-framed homes that we use and the timber-based homes that don't also involve traditional brickwork actually can reduce upfront embodied carbon by 90%. There's also 90% less waste in building because, again, everything is produced to pre-ordered sizes. You don't have to cut things down on site. There's no slight changes in site conditions, etc. It actually produces 90% less waste overall. It's a very, very efficient, very lean process. And modular producers could easily switch to building just EPCA models very easily. There's no real loss to efficiency there with them, and there is no loss to supply. There's no supply disruption either. Modular is therefore driving up productivity and innovation in construction. We estimate that over £200 million has been spent by our members on R&D since 2017, and that represents a significant amount of spending relative to the rest of the construction sector. About 10% actually, which when you consider that our members represent about 1% of residential only output, is a very significant share. About 30% of the R&D spending by all construction of buildings companies is by modular. So that's very significant. And this has obviously led to those developments in terms of green housing. It's produced homes that we believe are better, and it has also produced efficiency gains in terms of output per man hour, and productivity has improved by 40% over traditional build methods. So you get the same product with 40% less man hours put into it. And again, that waste reduction figure of 90% also comes out from the efficiency savings. And with build-out times halved, as I outlined in the first slide. And I think this is the last one on benefits. Like I say, I might make it too markety. But it's doing this while also solving the labour crisis that is causing a huge constraint on construction's ability to ramp up supply. We all know that we need to build more homes. The government themselves have set a target now for some time of 300,000 homes a year. They're not going to meet that by 2025. They've never met that. We've not produced that many homes in this country for 50 years. And there are many reasons for this, but a big part of the problem is that the construction industry, the traditional building, is essentially constrained by a significant labour shortage. We're talking about, this is a fact, 120,000 fewer people now work in construction this year than they did in pre-pandemic. And this is a long-term trend. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with it. But over the next 10 to 15 years, 500,000 workers in construction will retire. And there has not been enough people replacing them for years. And they will probably not be replaced. And that is a massive problem. And previously, we had partially relied on labour from Europe to make up the difference, particularly young migrant labour from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. But now with Brexit, that's unlikely to be able to replace the labour shortage, that the loss of labour that through people retiring from the industry. Essentially, construction is an ageing industry, and it is beset by these problems that are not easy to fix. Mark Farmer pointed this out in the Farmer Review 5 years ago, and things have only got worse since. The benefit of modular is that it tends not to require many traditional trades at all because everything is produced on an assembly line. As a result, shifting to the manufacturing process means we aren't dependent on most of those trades. And actually, to give an example, one of our members doubled their workforce since Christmas. Most of the people in their companies work in manufacturing roles, not in construction jobs, even though they are still building a house and still essentially delivering the same product, or an improved product in a lot of cases. And this has important effects for the levelling up agenda the government have been prioritising, because with a traditional house, you have to build the whole thing on site. So where do the construction workers come from? Well, high growth areas like London, urban areas in particular, tend to have a significant shortage of construction labour. So people have to move from other parts of the country, often on a temporary basis, to those areas. With modular, the houses are all built in the same place. They're built in a factory, and you can put that factory wherever you want. So our members have factories in Corby and Selby and Derby, and then the houses are delivered to the construction site where they're installed with far fewer people, far fewer site visits. So what we're doing is creating stable and secure jobs in places where they need them. And we're also delivering houses where they're needed, in the high growth, high demand areas where there's not a lot of construction labour. The result of this is that we don't need the levels of subcontracting either. We've heard a lot today about the fragmentation in the construction industry and the problems that that produces for build quality and fire safety, in fact. Most of our members will be the principal contractor, and 80 to 90% of the work that's done on a house, in some cases nearly 100%, is done in-house. There isn't the subcontracting. Most of their workers, as you can see there, are on pay-as-you-earn contracts, and they're full-time workers. So as a result, and this is bearing in mind that this is a new industry, and we are producing about 2,500 homes a year, our members have 2,000 people employed in these sort of factory roles, in permanent roles. And as I said before, all of this helps to drive up quality. We believe the assembly line process creates the positive feedback loops, efficiency gains, and significant quality control processes, and snagging rates are reduced as a result of that, and also the shift away from materials like brickwork, which often introduce problems in terms of quality and finish. So you can see here how modular's grown, but where we expect to be. As I say, that dotted blue line there is where we are hoping, where our members expect to be. It's a realistic expectation, and I should say now that our members alone have 8,000 modular homes under contract right now, and 7,000 at late stage production. So you can see how this is not a fantasy, this is where the industry is going, this is where construction is likely to be. And it's going to be a big player, regardless of whether anything might happen to any particular member. It's a very substantial industry, and we can see some traditional builders are now moving into modular as well. Berkeley Group, for instance, being one significant example, establishing their own factories and producing homes that are modular and built off-site. But you can also see here how there is potential for members to go further. Forecasts based on capacity indicate that they could be producing up to 15,000 homes in the whole sector, over 20,000 homes by 2025. It's 10% of all houses in the country. So it's very substantial. Now, despite all these benefits, there are obviously challenges facing the industry. It's a new, innovative area. There's a lot of diversity and competition in the market. There's a lot of new products, and not all of them are of the same quality. And our members all recognise that there are challenges in relation to fire safety that come with modular. And a lot of these are specific to modular. There are a few that are shared with the whole building industry. For one thing, because it's new and innovative, modular uses a wide range of novel methods and techniques to build homes. And it's a maturing market, but it's also highly variegated. As I say, there are lots of players, lots of competition, diversity, no one size fits all for modular housing. And the existing fire safety regime was designed for traditional building, and by that I mean that, yes, the building regulations do allow for the functional requirements to be met by modular producers, but the actual approved documents themselves are obviously geared towards traditional builders, and that makes sense. Up until very recently, that's how nearly every home in the country was built. But this means that the existing regime doesn't necessarily fit what modular are doing. And there are obvious issues here as well in the way that modular housing is constructed. The nature of it means that when you combine modules together, there can be voids between the buildings. It's very common for that to be the case. And so it poses a sort of additional fire risk that needs to be mitigated by manufacturers. And passive fire protection is an important part of that process. Creating fire blocks is going to be a key way of addressing that, but as a result, there needs to be extra regulations in this area. There's going to need to be differences in the way that we construct homes, and the approved documents are going to need to change in order to reflect the different requirements the modular industry needs. And of course, this all makes it more complicated and expensive for modular manufacturers to prove they meet standards at the moment under the current regime. They have to go out of their way, and I'll show you how they're doing that in a moment. So, and of course, as it involves prefabrication, amending modular buildings later hampers some of the efficiency gains. Members like things to all be done up front. It's a production process. You wouldn't change how you build a car halfway through building it. You would change it at the beginning, at the outset, and you would build that in. So as a result, our members like to make sure that they have everything in order at the front end, at the beginning of the build process, at the design stage. And again, I will show you in a second how they do some of this. But it does mean that existing systems and regulations do not always reflect what modular members need or how they work. And then finally, the whole building industry is obviously going to be affected by the Building Safety Act. We've heard a lot about that today, and I don't need to give you much more information. But the new gateway process does introduce delays in construction at stages 2 and 3, and that's going to apply to modular as well as it applies to anyone else. So how is modular working to resolve these issues? Well, members are all taking different approaches to how they deal with these challenges. It's not something that I can talk about in general terms as a result, and like I said, I'm not a fire engineer. But as the industry doesn't have a standardized modular specific set of safety regulations, members are essentially having to self-regulate. Obviously, they are meeting building regulations, but they're doing so in ways which are very different to the way that traditional builders do so. This can include fire testing individual components, whole modules, combining data tests from tests into computer models, working with fire safety engineers from very early on in their build, and compiling detailed handover packs with fire safety information. So to give a case study, Vision Modular Systems is one of our members. They were founded in 2010, and they are now one of the largest modular producers in the country. They produce 3D modules for high-rise commercial and residential developments. That's a completed building there. It's in Croydon. It's actually, like I said earlier, the tallest modular tower block in Europe. I think it has something like 800 homes in it or something like that. To give a case study about what they're doing in this space, Vision test every single element that go into their build. They do fire testing on this, detailed fire testing, and they don't necessarily trust what manufacturers tell them about fire safety data. They test everything. And they're having to do this because, like I say, they are having to go the extra mile to meet those regulations. So they've also commissioned the building research establishment to set out test parameters for and undertake full-scale fire safety tests for their modules. So they literally take the modules and they burn them in full fire situations and have carried out detailed testing independent of Vision to determine their safety. Obviously, these full-scale practical tests are impractical for every build that they do. So as a result, Vision appoint a fire safety engineer to model performance using data on each of those components and the fire safety, full-scale fire safety modeling data that they have already done. And then the engineer determines whether or not they need further tests to be carried out, potentially relating to individual components, potentially relating to the combination of those components together. Vision then undertake testing on these components or scenarios, depending on what they need, what the fire engineer determines is necessary. He then produces a final thermal mechanical model, and this is then submitted to the London Fire Brigade and Building Control for third-party review. When the building is complete and approved, handover documentation is given to the owner, and then regular fire inspections check properties for safety changes over time. This is particularly, I think this is true for traditional build as well, but in modular, again, if you have people knocking through walls, it's very possible to do, but obviously that has implications for how safe that building continues to be, and when you're dealing with a high-rise scenario, a higher risk building, as DLUC would now call it, then you need to be making sure that that does not impinge on any fire safety gains. So that gives you an overview of what one of the largest modular producers in the country has done. As I say, our members are all doing different things. And this is a complicated area. I think it's an area where, with modular being so new, the regulatory system is still working to catch up, still working to develop its own system for modular. But with all that said, it's clear from the stats that I showed earlier that modular is an expanding, maturing market. It is here, it has arrived, it is going to be big. And as a result, it is also going to be very important that fire safety is built into the way modular is regulated from the outset, and that modular is allowed to have a significant part in the market through the use of appropriate regulatory measures. Our members all recognise the challenge, the responsibility that comes with building these homes. They have spent hundreds of millions of pounds on developing their homes, testing them, and ensuring that fire safety is built into what they do. There are obviously always going to be improvements, and as we heard earlier as well, there are lots of different players emerging in this market. Our members represent about 70% at present, and they're all doing very high quality stuff, but we're also aware that there are lots of new players. The market may change, the products vary, the quality varies. This is natural and inevitable when there is a new and innovative industry emerging, but essentially, we believe that on the whole, modular is going to be a safe and reliable product, but what we hope to happen is that the regulations will allow modular to realise its potential, because as you can see, there are a host of benefits that it brings. We think it's going to be necessary to build greener, better homes faster. We don't think there's another way of doing it. We think modular has to be central to that. And we believe that our producers and certainly our members are rising to the challenge. But they are aware that guidance documents are geared towards traditional building methods and would like to see more done in the way of creating a more balanced system to ensure that modular producers can do what they do and do it well. So thank you very much.